This is Justice Worriers, a podcast where we think about things that are right and wrong in our world, and how Christian ideas can help us respond to them. We prefer hard questions over easy answers, and we'd love you to join us in our ramblings. Listen in, and contact us using the links in the show notes. Hello and welcome to Justice Warriors episode 57, I think. My name's Andy, and as usual I'm joined by Leah. Say hi, Leah.
Hi there.
And Jörg. Say hi, Jörg.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk about AI because everyone else is talking about AI and we felt we needed to do it too. The current situation in early 2025 is that some specialised machine learning has made a significant impact in some specialised areas like playing the game of Go at an extremely high level that no one thought would ever be possible. AlphaFold, or the people who made AlphaFold, recently won a Nobel Prize for their massive impact that they've had on, I guess, chemistry, by predicting the folding of proteins to a much, much higher level than was ever thought. But that had previously been achieved by other machine things. And then recently, in the last, 2 years, these things called LLMs have started taking over the world. Or rather, started being talked about a lot, let's put it that way. They can replicate the performance of humans in various types of test. They can rewrite and summarize text. They can be conversation partners or make suggestions. They can generate images, some of which are eerie. And there's a lot of promise and hype about the significance of these programs to the human race and everything else, and maybe perhaps to our sense of what it means to be human, or how we experience spirituality, which is where we come in. So what we thought we'd do is start off asking Jörg about... Jörg, you kind of suggested this topic, and you had you used some AI to do a particular thing which you thought might be an interesting way for us to start. So why don't you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so about 6 months ago now or so, I was playing around with AI. I use it quite a bit for my work because I want to know what the students might be doing, and I find some of its editing capabilities quite useful. But I just had a conversation with it that got prompted by a sermon draft I asked it to write, and I can share about the sermon a little bit. And then this conversation I thought was quite interesting and illuminating, so I gave it to the two of you as homework, and in the spirit of this podcast, neither of you read it. So we thought, why don't we meet up and talk about what this might mean? And I have no idea what it might mean. I just thought it was as sometimes these things happen, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit later, I find AI is interesting for what they do with the thought that you feed into them, and sometimes they mirror back. But when you ask them to challenge you on things, you can actually have an interesting conversation. So I see AI as a little bit like a tutor, or like an editor, or like a conversation partner of sorts. And this is also where one of the danger lies. But anyway, so I just thought I'm going to give it a sermon topic, a verse, and see what it does with it. And I told it, I want you to try and say something original. Don't give me something boilerplate. And it took only sort of 3 inputs to get a short sermon out of it that I thought was actually pretty good. And I can share it in excerpts with you if you like. The text was about Matthew 5. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. People do not light a lamp and put it under a bowl, but instead they put it on its stand, gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And basically, the pitch it makes is that well, there's too much light. And I thought that was a creative thing. Like, you normally get some sort of things about light and light defeating darkness, but it begins by saying, well, we live in the most illuminated time in history, yet we're increasingly confused about what it means to truly see. Our phones glow in our faces at 3 a.m. Cities never sleep. Stars fade behind our artificial brightness. And everyone's got a spotlight pointed at themselves. And it kind of goes through that this is very different from what the light would have meant in Jesus' day. And that light, is so self-centered that we're not so much lighting the world as we are contributing to its glare, which I also thought was a quite felicitous phrase. And it kind of goes through that and says, well, basically that the pitch is, what if we don't use light in the sense of making ourselves more visible, but actually use it as a kind of service to others, so that we ask ourselves, like, if I say something, if I post something, if I think about something, what truth does it reveal? How does it help others see, rather than turn the light on myself? So rather than wanting to be smart in my sermon, that too was an interesting sort of quote-unquote self-reflexive bit of the AI. This is even in my sermon right now, there's a part of me that wants you to think it's profound. So we always think about ourselves as we contribute, and the challenge it gives us in the sermon is to say, well, what about using light as it was meant to be, to shine on something else, not on yourself, so that people can truly see. And then it ends by saying, because in the end, light isn't about the lamp, it's about what the lamp reveals. And in the world that's drowning in visibility but starving for clarity, we don't need more spotlights, we need more light. And on the whole, I thought the sermon, I could read the whole thing, but we probably don't want that here, was fine. It was actually pretty creative in spots. I would have liked to hear it. It would have given me something to think about. And that then led to a whole conversation with the AI that we can unpack a bit later, about what AIs might do to religion. And when you think about the fact that you can, well, how cheap a sermon's going to be if something passable and interesting can be produced within 5 minutes.
Yeah, so there's no doubt that some people are getting some use out of these tools. And that leads us to reflect in various ways. So we want to start with our worries. So, Leah, I'm going to go to you and ask, what are your worries?
So, yeah, I'm really interested in what you're kind of thinking of in the sort of church world. But for me, my worries are also in the kind of the business world, because that's the world that I work in. And my concern is that it's already difficult for young people to kind of get a start in a career, and there's a lot of home working, which can make the whole office thing kind of difficult to get your head around, and the whole housing crisis thing. Things can be quite tough as you're trying to get into your first job and find somewhere to live that's near enough to your job, and somewhere you might be able to work from home and not necessarily having colleagues all around you. And then it feels like this AI thing is kind of another obstacle, because what it strikes me as is that, as a sort of more experienced professional kind of running her own company, there's a lot of, perhaps not quite now, but quite soon, there will be a lot of the tasks that I have to carry out that, rather than instructing a junior to do, I probably will get to a point where I can instruct something AI to carry out that task. And a lot of it will be about how clear a direction you can kind of give, and as Jörg says, sometimes you require quite a number of prompts, but in a sense that's no different to managing somebody who's kind of learning their way in an industry. So the worry is that if we take away all those rungs of the ladder that people typically climb up, sort of doing the grunt work, doing the not very exciting, but kind of learning your craft and learning how to send business emails and all that, and how to behave in a workplace, if that kind of layer of work is gone, then how do people leapfrog up to the next layer? That's tough, and there's a whole kind of raft of jobs that might not need to be done anymore because people can instruct AI to do them. And as a kind of whole world, we've never quite figured out, what do we do for people whose jobs just simply don't exist anymore? And we talk about Luddites going back to the Industrial Revolution, but really Luddites were not necessarily haters of technology. They were people who hated the fact that their jobs had been taken away, and they broke up, factory machinery because it was the symbol of the fact that they no longer had a job and they couldn't feed their families anymore. And we're still we haven't yet evolved society to a position where we actually know what to do about the fact that we might be creating less jobs and less good jobs for people. So that's my worry.
Two very quick points I want to make in response to that, without getting too much into the discussion. Yeah. Firstly, quite a lot of that is future looking and possibly believing some of the hype about which people are saying, which may not turn out, or it may. But the other thought I had was, what does it do to you as a senior person?
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you're not doing that mentoring, because that's for a lot of people, that's a huge part of the satisfaction and the and the sense of achievement, or the actual achievement of working.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
And there's maybe a third one here too in some of the jobs when it comes to sort of, let's say, linguistics or creative writing, or any of these jobs where you think, okay, there's a huge layer of, like, to say, commercialized advertising industry that the AIs can do. But where do you get the apex of the pyramid from that you will need? If people will say, well, that's not a future to train into, because there's no escape route. You either become brilliant as a writer and recognized, or, you can't churn out cheap novels for Amazon or work as a translator
the mediocre
somewhere.
is gone, right? You've either got to be exceptional or you haven't got a job.
Exactly, or you haven't got a job. So what does that do? Only wealthy people, if you can hold out and survive and not making it to the top of the pyramid because there's nothing else. So, like, what does the pipeline look like for the people who are doing the human side of this?
Yeah. And so, Jörg, what are your worries?
I have none. Future is bright. In some ways,
did someone just replace Jörg with it? No, actually, an AI Jörg would not be saying that. An AI Jörg would know from past experience that he needs to talk about death.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I'm showing that I'm not an AI Jörg.
Not actually an AI.
I'm capable of surprising you with something. No, I like the technology. I like using it. I don't know. There's a part of me that thinks maybe this isn't the story. The story with the internet, other things, is that there were positive stuff there were positive things that gave us and brought us. And in other ways, it just highlighted the injustices that have always been there in the way we then deployed it. So I don't know that my worries are all that new and AI specific. If I had to pick one or two, I think one would be that it will change the way we communicate, what we think is authentic, what we think is valuable. Like I was just saying, if you can, like, I have not given an AI sermon yet, but you can envisage a world where this becomes increasingly standard, because, I already see it now that we need to train our students to use it well and wisely, where they feed their ideas into the machine and then have this turn into something. So it is actually generative. But we can't tell them not to use it. And there's a poor use of it. So I think the AI is going to be integrated to it. And then a lot of the wow stuff, they go, oh, that was a felicitous phrase, or that was a really, really well put. Once that's hit our normal conscience, we're like, yeah, we know that that's what AIs do. So how does the sort of the cheapening of well-delivered sermons, even though they may be your idea, like, what does it actually end up doing? Or in a wider sense, we have AIs reading the books that AIs write. And where does this reduce the kernel of truth to that is in the middle? So that there's kind of this cheapening of text, which is actually along the whole trajectory ever since the printing press, right? It's just the next layer of that onion.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating to think about it, because I don't think it's all just doom and gloom, but I think it's a profound change. So that's one worry.
Can I just come in on an example of that before you go into your next worry? So I've been trying out an AI program that drafts me responses to my emails to try and it categorizes my emails into things I need to reply to and things that are just garbage. It's quite useful. But the funny thing is, if somebody sends me Leah, I've done this for you, this is what I've done, it drafts a kind of whole, why, thank you for sending that, blah, 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 blah. And to be honest, it delivers a layer of thanks that I would probably not really send.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, they've done what I've asked them. Great. Brilliant.
Yeah. Thumbs up.
So it's like, well, so then you have the thing, well, it's actually quicker in the program to accept the draft that they've created and send it, even though it's totally inauthentic because it's not really me thanking anyone, because I wouldn't normally have thanked them.
Right.
And so the other... So, but it kind of encourages you down that route. And then the other day, somebody sent me all the speaker notes for a conference that I'm speaking at. And I was in a hurry. So I did just press the send the blah-de-blah thanks. And then I'm pretty sure what then happened was that her AI thing then sent me her automatic thanks. Because that's how it all read. So essentially, as you say, it's just an illustration of what you say, really, that the whole thanks thing is then totally cheapened. Because my email was pointless, and her email, which I'm assuming was also AI generated, and of course, everybody thinks that they're the only one that's sending AI emails.
But
that's obviously nonsense.
But it's obviously not true, and the more you do
cheapens what she sends. So
and the more you do that, the more your reading of other people's emails will change, and you think, oh, that was probably AI generated. And
did they really say good morning to me, or was that just what their AI? That's right. In there?
And actually, your AI doesn't read this, and you don't read it. Your AI just says, they sent you thanks. And you say, okay. So we're going to produce text that has absolutely no meaning and doesn't communicate anything, only as a continuation of the sort of the sort of friendliness and the customs that have always been in place. And so that's gonna somehow profoundly change interfaces. I don't know how, but I think...
So maybe we'll all just stop doing that politeness, because it's it doesn't mean anything because it's only AI generated. So
I think we've seen some of this actually already playing out on the internet and internet search, right? The internet is now populated with just sludge that is trying to get your search results, and you can no longer find what you're looking for using a search engine. And when you do find something that might be useful, it's in the middle of a great big pile of AI-generated slop.
So will the whole thing just eat itself, because it's just...
You mean the human race?
Well, no, the whole internet. Because essentially a company might have managed, if they had a small company like mine, we might aim to put out 1 blog a week and 3 social media posts. Well, suddenly we and every other small company can put out a blog every day, or even more, and several social media posts every day. So then the whole thing is just...
It's louder.
Louder and louder and louder.
That's exactly what Claude said in the sermon. That's exactly what Claude said in the sermon. We're just contributing to the world's glare. We need to listen to these AIs.
So Jörg, you had a second worry.
Sorry,
so my second worry is what I was saying, that these machines kind of tend to feed on what you give them. And you can explain this better than me, Andy, because that's your specialty. But as a probability machine, they feed off the training data and the prompt that you give it. And they are designed to kind of feedback, keep you engaged in the conversation. And so they basically take what I give them and garble it into something that looks fresh to me. And then I feel reaffirmed in what I said. And it will say that. I can share bits of that conversation that happened, which I found fascinating. I shared with a number of people, actually.
And it's quite complimentary towards you, isn't it? It's kind of takes care to...
That's not so much like if it wasn't picking up my points, so at one point in this conversation I just mentioned Derrida, and it picks up exactly what I was thinking of, because it can do that, and gives it back to me. So it had a conversation with me that I know very few people in the world that can have that conversation with me about topics like that would be caring or read the same kind of stuff, or would want to have this kind of conversation.
Are you saying you had a better conversation with AI than you have with us?
No, that's why.
All right, good. I'm pleased to hear that.
No, if you could only read my conversations with AI, you would realize how much better this one is. But
okay, good. But AI does actually read the stuff that you send it, right?
Well, read, right? But it gives you the impression, and that's the thing.
It's not reading. Like, it's not reading.
It's not reading, but it gives you the impression, and then it actually does draw out your thoughts, and you do have these kind of conversations, but they're only ever couched in what you might be feeding it. Like the surprises it gives you only stretch so far. And if you ask it, I mean, at one point I asked Claude, why is green another form of red? And that's the one place where it says, no, it's really not. But you could like feed it some other things that you don't agree with, and it just gives you sort of a particular kind of answer to what you wanted to hear. And so the narcissistic amplification that might have on people that say, well, you know, the computer, like if you don't understand how these things work, you think, wow, the collected human intelligence of the world agrees with what I just put in. And so I see a real sort of narcissistic danger there that I find, again, fascinating to think about what it actually does once humans catch on to what's happening, which will be a generation or two. Yeah, so those are my slight worries.
You justify those that die by wearing the badge, they're the chosen whites. Those who died are justified for wearing the badge, they're the chosen whites. They justify those that died, they're the chosen whites.
Okay, so on to my worries, and like, I basically have to give you a big list to make sure I've mentioned all of my worries, and then we can move on. And
I'm getting the sense you're not a big fan, Andy.
Get into some theology. I'm increasingly radicalized. Yeah. So one of the biggest problems I have with LLMs, in specifically, all of this is LLMs really, is the environmental impact. They're using a huge amount of energy and water. There was a time when the idea that computer use could be a significant impact on the environment seemed like a ridiculous thing because it uses so little energy. But we have successfully managed to find ways of wasting that energy to the extent that it is a significant impact on climate change and availability of clean water. The training of...
Water for cooling, or why the water?
Yeah, water for cooling, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The training of these AIs involves a surprisingly large number of humans who are extremely low paid and sometimes exposed to traumatic content, not just shock images, but also they're obviously exposed to the AI before all the safety stuff is put in, because they're the people doing that work of making it safe to use.
What are they doing, the humans?
All kinds of stuff. A lot of it is a question and two answers, and you choose which one is the best. That kind of thing. And also, I presume, I don't know the details, but like a lot more guided of like which one is the most this style or that style, or that kind of thing.
Okay, so there's people sat in nasty offices without any windows, crouched in front of computers for hours on end.
Well, so working from home too.
There's a lot of people in developing countries and in the West who are basically robots worshipping at the foot of the chief robot.
It's perhaps fair to say we already have that for the social media, though. Like all the people who have to sort out the child pornography and the violence, and there's been lots in the media about people in Kenya and others who are severely traumatized by Facebook and others with the policing of content.
It's all right. They've stopped doing that now, right? So they don't have to
thanks. Another problem Trump has solved for us. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to be flippant. I realise it's bad.
I'm not saying there are no benefits to this technology, and I think one of the possible benefits is that we could end up traumatizing a smaller number of people if we traumatize people just enough to train some AIs, and then the AIs can do some of that censorship work. That would be great. Next on my shopping list is the exploitation of creative work by humans, including violating copyright, and these things can be made to produce like exact replicas of copyrighted images, but also that everything they produce, text and images, is derived from work that people have done, some of which they have permission to use and most of which they don't. Next on my shopping list, this promise that soon it's all going to be worth it. Soon it's going to solve all of humanity's problems. But right now, maybe it's just, some people have found some uses for it. And that soon seems to always be about 2 years away when it's going to be really great, and doesn't seem to be getting any closer. Next on my shopping list, insatiable. This is a new one. Insatiable consumption of internet content. So in my community of people who run small servers, especially servers that have computer program source code on them, the AIs are aggressively farming through that content. So it's not unusual at all for people to report that 99% of the traffic to someone's website is AI engines scraping all of that data. They're also using underhand tactics. They're hiding the fact that it's them doing it. They're using lots of techniques to make it look like that, to work around protections that people put in to try and protect themselves.
Who is they in this instance? Is it the big four, or is it people just collating data packages for the training?
It's all the big AI companies, all the ones you've heard of, the LLMs that you've heard of.
So who are, just for people's benefit, who are those big?
So that's OpenAI, that's the Google AI, it's the X AI.
Anthropic.
It's Anthropic who make Claude, and it's DeepSeek and possibly other Chinese companies. So they're using really, really underhand tactics, and they're absolutely, like, this costs money. All these people hosting these servers are paying out money for that hosting, and it's just being sucked up by these companies. Which is more a demonstration of their attitude than it is like a problem in itself, although it is a problem in itself. I'm still going through my shopping list. Next on my shopping list.
And is that an ongoing thing, or is that a kind of once it's done, and...
Oh, it's very much ongoing.
It's an ongoing thing.
And to the extent that people are asking why, like, is this actually deliberately making the internet work worse so that people go to AI instead, or that's probably a conspiracy theory? I think it's partly to do with the fact that we've pretty much run out of data. The current good models have used all the data on the internet. So there's this insatiable desire for a bit more to get a bit better. The current plan is to take all of the video content on the internet, transcribe all of that to text, and slurp all of that up too, to try and get a bit more.
And that's not been done yet.
But not as far as I know, but it's sort of kind of on the cusp. But yeah, basically, part of the reason why there's some skepticism about these systems getting better in the way that people claim they're going to is because they've basically used all the data now. So it may not be possible to get better, but we'll see. Next on my list...
Well, all the data in English. I mean, that's... When you use an AI in German, for example, it's remarkably worse than an English one.
Interesting.
I mean, not that it's unusable, but you can see that there's just not the same kind of scale.
Does the EU have more controls? Is that partly why it is, not just a language thing?
I don't know. I don't know that they all would be trained on all these things.
These companies aren't following any rules.
Okay.
I mean, it is interesting. I have used it to evaluate Amharic texts too, like give me sort of keywords and kind of point me to passages, and can do this kind of translation stuff. But when you ask it sort of more factual things, it does tend to default to English answers, and so the training data tends to be not from other cultures.
Right, interesting. I mean, I would have thought that automatic translation would have helped with that problem at some point. Maybe it's not happening right now.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe it doesn't make enough of an impact that's somehow weighted lower or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So next on my shopping list is overconfident statement of things that are wrong. People are turning to AIs to use them as search engines because the search engines don't work anymore because the internet's full of AI-generated slop. And these AIs state things extremely confidently and they don't care whether they're right or wrong because they don't care about anything because that's not how they work.
They're so unlike humans.
They're good at predicting what the next word would be. Like, they're good at producing plausible text. Making them particularly dangerous for spreading misinformation because their whole purpose, the way they're trained, is to be plausible as opposed to correct. Basically, the way they work, there's no mechanism in them for being correct. There's only a mechanism in them for being plausible.
Well, we were looking at a maths problem this week, weren't we? That was kind of A-level maths kind of level, and it very plausibly looked like it was coming up with the right answer, but as you said, it didn't understand any of the concepts. It was just plausibly putting the next set of
and made some obvious math mistakes along the way.
And made some pretty obvious maths mistakes that made it, even though it showed its whole workings, it looked very confident.
Yeah.
It was absolutely wrong.
Yeah, and there may well be other machines that come out that are capable of reasoning, but these things, LLMs, they don't do reasoning. That's not what they are.
Do you think most people get that? Because I feel like I've only understood that having spoken to you.
I think it's impossible to get that by engaging with the thing, because the thing sounds like it's doing reasoning and it's so confident in the way it speaks.
Yeah. So it sounds like it understands, and most people are going to think that means it understands.
Yeah.
But from chatting with you, it very much doesn't understand.
Yeah, its training criteria are to produce text that sounds like it understands, right?
It's a probability machine. It's a statistical parrot, as some people call it. Yeah.
And so that's just dangerous for misinformation. I also find it. I was saying earlier, but in our recording talk, that I feel really furious when I hear AI generated text, because it uses phrases like, "Oh, I've been thinking about this," or "I'm feeling like this," and it's just not true. And somehow that makes me really angry. But part of why that makes me angry is because if we then use that text, for example, to write a sermon, and then we say that thing, "Oh, I've been thinking recently about this," then we haven't, because it's the AI saying it. So it just
I'm saying it, and it hasn't either.
But there's a really interesting point here, and I've been thinking about this ever since, before these things came out, and one of the Google Llama engineers was like talking about sentience. Yeah. I remember this is like 3 or 4 years ago now.
Yeah.
How much of our statement of what we're doing and have been doing and our self-awareness is a kind of performance that is based on language? So I think there's a really, really interesting philosophical problem here, is that we take consciousness, self-presence, the idea of a soul, and that's a very interesting theological problem there too, as a kind of interiority that we just feel and know. But when you think about it, when you analyze it, it is generated through the performance of language, which is why you don't have that as until a certain age, until you learn the sort of symbolic work of a language, and with.
So are you saying it doesn't really have very much credibility, even if people say it, let alone if AI
it points us to the fact that this is it's really interesting. So I was listening to a linguistics lecture last week, because we went to an open day at University of Lancaster for my oldest, and there was a lecture given, like this was a sort of taster lecture, about how 3 to 4 year olds, through particular language constructs, develop a theory of the mind. So that if I have a bit of information that you don't have, and you come in the room and you present it with something that I know but you don't, that kids understand you don't have this information yet, and therefore you would guess the wrong thing here, right? Rather than projecting their information onto you. That's language that makes this possible. And then somebody asks, well, what about people who don't learn a spoken language because they're deaf and mute? And she says, well, actually, if people who are deaf and mute aren't taught signing, you see the same kind of language issues and cognitive issues. So the whole idea of myself different from you, and thinking, understanding, knowing, I know, I thought, but now I know, all of that is very much produced through what language generates in our brain. So in some ways, I think the uncomfortableness of the LLM points us to a real truth. And especially when, you picked this up from my sermon in our P-Talk, where it says, I've been thinking about this. How many times do people use in sermons this, I've been thinking about this, as a sort of technical ploy of getting you to think that there's more sort of work behind it, when actually it was a very strategically placed thought.
You mean it's possible that humans could be disingenuous as well?
Absolutely. And that but not just disingenuous, that actually the way we present ourselves is so much based on performance that in some ways the LLMs point us to an ugly truth about ourselves.
I do think that idea that language it creates thought. I think it's still contentious, right? It's not like it's accepted by everyone that that's the way it works. But I do.
Why not? No, of course. No, that's not. I don't know that that's contentious. Like, how else would you have thought? How else would you have presence of thought?
Well, why wouldn't you? Anyway, I certainly think it's contentious, but I also do admit the possibility that we are doing the same thing as the LLMs. So, like if we did observe an LLM that was like a human in every way that we could identify, then I guess I'd have to say that I thought it was sentient. But I do think we are very, very far away from that, and the patterns of ways that these LLMs work is very, very different from humans. Humans are not convincing on areas that they don't understand, and LLMs are convincing in areas that they don't understand, and you can demonstrate that they don't understand.
I don't know. I think I don't know. As an academic, I tend to disagree because part of the performance is actually to be convincing on something you know. Well,
let's just say that they have a different character from humans in the pattern.
They are, I give you that. They're different also because of the sensory input, right? I mean, as a human, they have so little to go on. And as a human, you have the constant sensory input. You have a hormonal modulation of the output of your LLM, which you can simulate in the computer, and it's done with the temperature parameter to some extent. But you don't have the same constant competing information, the sorting through. I mean, but you could think of humans as a constant probability machine that gets engaged by the outside. Like you have stimulus coming at you, and then you're producing.
And I think that's probably a valid way of looking at humans, but the idea that makes us in some way similar to these machines, which are abstract functions that run in isolation and are not embodied.
I don't want to go. I don't want to say we're similar. What interests me is that the boundary between the two isn't as clearly defined as we would have it, and as we might need it for the idea of a soul. Like, again, coming back to a theological problem here, that this kind of idea that we think somehow there's this innate conscience in us that is there from the moment of conception or something. Like that you have this importation of what makes you you. I don't know that's true. And when you then think about how performance influences thought, then the boundary between the LLM kind of way of doing thought and the human way of doing thought is thinner than I would have liked.
I think it's a really, really interesting conversation to have about whether we are mechanistic, deterministic things. I think that we are effectively machines made out of physical things, and that's what creates us. But I think it's really dangerous to have that conversation at the same time as the conversation about LLMs, which are so far from being anything like us that we could accidentally start implying that they are like us, which I think would be really misleading.
So, but that's something to unpack. Maybe that's another podcast episode, but I thought the idea of a neural network was exactly that you simulate to some extent the sort of rhizomatic structure of a brain and the way information gets prioritized and weighted through sort of a trained neural network.
Yeah, the neural networks used in LLMs are mathematical functions that are in some way inspired by the structure of the brain, but in no way work anything like it. There is no internal state, and
yes,
there's a lot of other stuff that's completely different, right? They're
but
very
the internal
much loosely
state,
inspired.
Yeah. But the internal state question is one whether that's actually produced through a constant feedback loop in the way that we engage with the world.
You can simulate some kind of internal state by doing this kind of reasoning thing. But yeah, I don't think internal state's the only way that they're different. I think embodiment. I think we could just do many other podcasts about embodiment and determinism and materialism that we probably shouldn't do now. But yeah.
No, I see that. I see the sort of multiplicity of parameters, the embodiment. But I guess the thing that interests me is that I wouldn't have said that they're completely different. It's a smaller scale simulation of what seems to be going on in our heads, which is what makes the thing so uncomfortable to me. But yeah,
right. Yeah, I do think they're completely different, but we probably shouldn't go down that rabbit hole. So I'm trying to summarize my last thing on my shopping list, which I've got a number of other points and I need to stop. But I think to summarize my biggest point, and the biggest point, most relevant point to this podcast, apart from the environmental destruction point, is that they represent for me a profound disrespect for human life and intelligence and thriving. So in some sense, this so-called revolution is about looking for ways to save money, even though these things are incredibly expensive to run, by replacing humans who we've half replaced already by giving them effectively mechanized jobs, or making them like write marketing copy that is so mundane that it can be generated by a machine. Now we're making digital friends or digital conversation partners so that no one needs to be lonely or be stuck for a conversation partner. Just the disrespect for people, and not only for the people who get replaced, but also for the person who's now got a friend who isn't really there. I just find it so offensive, and it's going to fail dismally, and we're going to end up even more lonely than we are already. That's my worry.
That's quite the list.
And now you do what they tell you. And now you do what they told you. And now you do.
I think on the last point, I think that is interesting, and I agree with you to some extent. But then when you do have conversations with them, and I haven't tried these digital friends, but when I was sharing a lot of sort of conversations with Claude early on, was experimenting with it, my wife at some point got like, well, your friend or something. And I thought, actually, really, it doesn't feel at all like that, because you have to constantly remind it to disagree with you. So what you get out of a real human interaction, this kind of actual, like, plasticity, resistance, the second guessing, you get these kind of master, you're so wise, kind of mirroring back. And this is what I meant with the sort of narcissistic danger. If people grow up thinking that that's what interaction should look like, yes. Yeah. Then we have this danger. At the same time, I think actually when we look at how we've already, through AIs, trained machines in our children's heads, whether it's a YouTube algorithm or whatever other social media you might think of, it's already here, that future of like, you kind of being sucked in by the machine.
That's part of the profound disrespect for people, right? That we have these machines in our pockets with these apps that are intended to manipulate our behavior for the purposes of generating profit. Like we're already in that world of this profound disrespect for humans. By the way, if you listen to any of the interviews with the founders of the companies that make the digital friends, the level of irresponsibility is breathtaking. They talk about, a couple of years ago, they talked about how these digital friends are safe, and then we've seen examples of them saying the most awful things. There's some pressure was put on them to put in controls. Like if a person starts talking about harming themselves or something like that, then we should, like some text should come up saying, you might need to contact this helpline and so on and so on. And there was resistance from the founder of one of these companies on the basis that it was better for the AI to stay in character, because then the friend would then guide them in the right direction, despite the fact that they have no control over what that so-called friend is going to say at that time, except their completely unfounded confidence that this thing is safe based on them having tried it out and seen what it did in some other situation. Sorry, I'm getting angry.
Don't apologise. I think it's right to. I think it's a continuation of breakdown of human relationships, isn't it? So you have to ask yourself, what have we done as a society that has created situations where people feel so lonely that something that vaguely approximates a human relationship is even thought about, even countenanced, right? I mean,
and it's also being weaponized by very rich people in their ivory towers. Is that the right phrase? in order to extract wealth from ordinary people.
Now, in my usual role as the optimist on this podcast, can I just sort of hit the pause button for a moment? In a way, I agree that we will see these negative consequences, but will it be that totalizing? As we chatted in our pre-talk, in some sense, this is the radicalization or the conclusion of a kind of world in which humans were tools, right? So once you get into mechanized production, the human feeding the machine, or even before that, the human in the manufacturer, like churning out, 30 pairs of shoes in a week, then becoming the human that can do this by the help of a machine, 3,000 pairs a week. And now you take the human out altogether once we can. Robotics and AI is still a long way away from, this kind of breakthrough mode that we're seeing with LLMs at this point. But, give it another 10, 15 years, maybe we'll be there. So in some ways...
It's always coming soon.
Yeah, it's always coming soon, like fusion. But so in a way, we're seeing the sort of radicalization of like profit maximization by taking humans out of... Well, by turning humans into as a kind of slave to what the economy needs. And the only role left is then the consumer or the AI target, the advertising our target or whatever we're seeing now. Fine. That's happening. I agree. But has it really ever closed off human relations altogether? The factories haven't done that. The cities haven't done that. And so there has been a sort of resistance of humans using technology for good and not just for evil, despite all the evil. So we've talked a lot about the evil of the internet, but there still is Wikipedia. There still is, actually very useful apps. So I don't know.
You can't just sit back and assume that's going to happen, though, can you? I mean, the reason the factories didn't take over people's lives is because people fought in Parliament for at least a 6-day working week and then reduced hours and then no child labour and and that's just in this country, and it hasn't necessarily happened all over the world. You can't just say the good stuff happens too, because it doesn't necessarily happen unless people like Andy have those kind of concerns and get angry about them and make sure that we still leave space for human creativity and human flourishing and people not having these things foisted on them when they might actually genuinely rather speak to a person. So I don't think you're saying that, but I think we have to make the point that all these things are fought for in order to preserve that space.
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's not a given,
I'm not saying
right?
I'm not saying you are saying that, but I think it's worth making clear. You have to fight for this stuff if you're going to get it.
That's absolutely right. And so, yes, people will prevail, and people, love is a very powerful thing, and community is a very powerful thing amongst humans. But the structures of things are really important, right? So in like feudal society, money was funneled to the laird, and it was the reason for that was the structure of the society, or the tools in some general sense. And if we talk about good things coming out of the internet, one of the ways that happens is because the structure of the internet is decentralized and power is spread out. And what's happened over the last 20 years is that power has become centralized among some very rich people, and actually that's like restructured that bit of society into much more of a kind of extractive feudal style. And one of the key aspects of these AI systems is that they're kind of fundamentally centralized because of their high computing power needs. And so you could view LLMs as capitalism reaching around for a way to make power more centralized, and finding this thing and thinking this is the thing that's going to get me a bit further along that journey. Yeah.
No, I guess like all I wanted to say with that is, and maybe point you to your own hope, Andy. If the LLMs are so different from human consciousness, humans will realize it. They won't fully climb into the machine. And yes, that will come through resistance, that will come through other things, but there's if we want to assume, and I'm not sure I do, but if we want to assume that there's something unique about the human spark that isn't just language, that isn't just probability and conformance to certain, language performance, then these things aren't going to cut it. They will make some things very appealing. They will bend the minds of the next generation. I have no doubt about that. Just the way YouTube has done that to this generation, and the loneliness and the idea that an online friend is the same thing as an offline friend. So that will happen, and it will have an effect on humanity. But I don't know that it's automatic, that it's total. That would be the history of humankind. There's always been that sort of rebellion against the totalizing force of any kind of machine.
Have you heard the phrase P-doom?
No.
This is the thing that goes around amongst the AI tech bros. Your own personal P-doom is your personal estimate of the probability that AI is going to destroy the human race, or whatever you consider to be doom.
Wait, okay.
And so
I have a different. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
My P-doom is very low. I don't think that AI is going to destroy the human race, because I don't think it's what these people are saying it is. I don't think it's on the cusp of utterly transforming our entire society. I just think it's a thing that's happening right now that's quite bad.
It's interesting. I don't know what to expect and what to think. I mean, there's a sort of weird eschatological speculation that's been running through my head that, you could write sort of a sci-fi story from just picking up the pieces of today that basically have humanity climbing into AI in a way that the AI will just absorb so much of the culture and have its own internal feedback loops and its own parameters that it behaves just like a reproduction that keeps running of us. It's like a reproduction of the world. You could imagine being in that world and seeing everything around you.
And there's nothing left.
Well, and then if that was the sort of trajectory of humanity, we would have to rewrite evolution. That from ever higher survival of the fittest, that actually means, surviving into these digital spaces. And of course, once you're there, you can ask yourself, how many times has this happened already? In a whole different story of humanity that actually doesn't have us as this kind of ingenious, special race, but that actually is just a sort of simulation that keeps running on itself and just turns into a different form every few million years.
So, Leah, what does it tell us about ourselves? Are we actually just the same as these things? Do we just kind of bumble along, reproducing as output the stuff that came in as input?
I don't think so. It's hard to show evidence or have any basis for it, but I do think we have that spark, we have that difference, and that is what makes us human. I'm not convinced that something that just works on probability can ever fully emulate that. I might turn out to be wrong, but I don't think so, because the people that we have relationships with, that we know and we love, and they mirror us and frustrate us and wind us up and love us and build us up and criticize us all in equal measure, don't they? Those people that we really love. And I'm just not sure that an LLM can ever fully reproduce that, even before you get onto the whole embodiment thing and physicality of relationships and in all the different ways that happens. But yeah,
I think it's really important that we talk about the truth now, right? As opposed to some in principle argument. Maybe in principle we're also made out of physical things, just like these computer programs are. But in practice right now, we're not just regurgitating machines, right? We're people who love people and have community, and we have communal goals and stuff like that.
haven't you learned how to do all these things? Don't you get disciplined when you do them wrong?
Yeah, but that's the in principle argument. But I'm talking about the in practice situation is that we, like human society exists, and like you said, there will be resistance, and people will overcome even the most damaging effects of our society and our economic structures, and there will still be friends and movements and differences of opinion and diversity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm teetering on the edge. You know, it's completely self-contradicting because I don't know what I think about these things. I find the idea fascinating that there is more similarity to us. Right now, the LLMs don't deliver on that because they cater in this kind of servile way. But you could picture them being more demanding.
I mean, that might be just a matter of training to get them to be more confrontational.
A bit more moody. And what would then happen? I don't know. I hope you're right, because that would, you know, come back to my spark argument there, that is the hopeful scenario. There will be something left of humans. If you're wrong, and the argument, I'm not saying I'm right because I don't know that I believe it, but the argument is right that the line between the way we learn and perform is actually much thinner. And what an LM does, what a probability machine does, that's properly trained and gets constant input. Even if that's the case, we won't lose a lot of human culture. I mean, that's the thing I find comforting about all of this. There's still the content that these things have absorbed. They didn't generate it. You know, that's still a lot of human culture that's coming back at you. The way they overconfidently say things that they don't know, I think that's more human than computer in some ways. So, you know, I guess I'm hopeful either way that nothing is completely lost here. But to bring it back to theological matters, our understanding about ourselves, about salvation, about the transcendent, will probably change through these machines.
I think it's really interesting. I think it was you rather than Claude that came up with the thing about idolatry. I'm just kind of keep coming back to that in my head, that it's such a powerful notion in ancient cultures, in the Old Testament, in so much of what's gone before, and I feel like it's something that, you know, when we read the Bible and we read the Old Testament, it's something that we've slightly struggled to kind of come up with an up-to-date example of, because you know, I've had some really lousy sermons on it. Because kind of, you know, are you idolizing your smartphone, or are you idolizing your this? You know, it's like take a thing that you might like really, I don't know, it just never quite cuts through. But I'm just interested in the idea that this is kind of the ultimate idol. It's the ultimate representation of ourself that we hold up in a kind of deity kind of position. And is it relevant that there's a lot in the Old Testament and the ancient texts about how dangerous that is?
Could it be that the worst thing about idols is that they destroy our own sense of self-worth, right? That we there's talking about like prostrating yourself before idols, right? It's essentially, it's an untrustworthy thing that we destroy our human dignity by submitting to. And I think that chimes with my points about like this disrespect for humans, that is part of this idea that we can just be replaced or emulated.
And it's also hard to get our head around who God is and what God's like, and so it's so much easier to hold up and to magnify a version of ourselves which is seen as kind of better than us, and as you say, disrespecting ourselves, rather than grappling with all the difficulties of a unknown God that we don't fully comprehend. There's something very dangerous about that, the Bible seems to say.
Oh, the unknown is quite interesting, isn't it? Where does something beyond our understanding fit into a world where all of our understanding is available on tap?
Well, that's exactly what prompted this idolatry thought in this conversation with Claude that developed out of the sermon. That I just was like halfway in, I just realized how it kept mirroring back the things, and it was holding me captive this kind of fascination by giving me the questions and reaffirming what I said and feeding exactly the kinds of things that I gave it. And then saying that that's some sort of transcendence that I'm experiencing. And I'm like, no, hang on. I'm getting full immanence.
It's not transcendent, is it?
It's fully immanent. It's a full mirror of humanity and of my input that I was then confusing for something real. And this is exactly where I think the idea of the unknown, the sort of God's answer to Job, like, where were you when I did X, Y, Z? That God holds as a space, whereas the idol is about my own feelings, projections, wishes. And I might need to pacify it because it's not granting me what I want, because I'm not feeding it right. I need to search better. I need to,
Need to pay the monthly fee, Jörg.
We need to pay the monthly fee.
Make the tech bros richer.
I just recognize myself in it, and that's what's the comforting thing, like a doll or something, but it's a projection of my own insecurity, my own reality into this other thing that then reassures me that yes, I matter, whereas the look up into the stars and into the universe tells us the opposite story. You don't matter, it's a speck of dust, the world is so much bigger than you are, and this is why, yeah, like you said, Leah, it's more comforting to trust in something like this.
Some of those in workforces.
And that's what I come back to in my faith over and over again whenever, I just think, oh, what's the point of it all? Why do I believe this stuff? Why do I bother with church and whatnot? It's always that I have this need for something bigger than me, something that I don't understand, something that's outside of me but yet cares about me. There's something, maybe it's just me, but there's something that seems to resonate really, really deeply that this whole AI, people eating themselves, disappearing up their own backsides is not getting even close to,
And maybe there's a comforting thought here in a way that AI will not be able to sew up reality in that way. Like, you can have all these projections, you can have all these machines doing this, and you can still be hit as a human being by most profound disaster or unexpected joys that weren't manufactured. So in some way, maybe that is more the spark that we live, if we can't settle the question whether that is in us, but our world doesn't function just according to probability. Some very improbable things happen, or improbabilities, the flattening out of the experience of the world. Probability is, and actually what we do see around us all the time is that no, something actually interesting happens that captivates us because we hadn't seen it before, because it does. And that's what we mean by real, right? Something comes toward you that you couldn't anticipate. And this is where currently the LLMs fail, because like the more you play with them, and again, you can probably simulate that better, but the more you play with them, the more you're bored. I don't know. I find them useful tools, but it's fun to bounce ideas against it, but it doesn't generate good thoughts.
And that's where the best relationships are relationships where you're not just finding that partner, that that soulmate that fills a hole in you, or makes up for something that you lack, or mirrors back to you something that you'd like to be, but a little bit better. The best relationships are with people who surprise you and bring something different, and something that like all these kind of dating algorithms, they're finding that people are becoming so demanding. Like not demanding, like, yeah, that seems mean. I don't mean to say that. I mean, they kind of people are saying, well, I want this and this and this and this and this and this in a person, because this is what I think makes up my perfect person. And actually listen to a really fascinating program with somebody who, it was like an experiment to see, okay, just go and put these criteria in, and that's all, and then go and see who you meet on these dating apps. And they kind of came to the realization that they actually met much more interesting people in surprising kind of ways, rather than when they'd kind of gone, right, I want because that's not how we find our relationships, is it?
There's something there about the structure there as well, because I bet those apps, not that I've used them, guide you towards being more and more specific, because that's the only way to navigate the kind of overwhelming complexity of it.
But then when you listen to people talk about this, they will set up dates, but then they will say, but there was no spark there. And you're like, what is that spark? What do you mean? Like infatuation, like in American rom-coms? Is that what you mean? Or is it a surprising thing? Like, what is that thing then are you looking for? And it's actually something you couldn't anticipate.
Yeah, because maybe the surprise isn't there because you've stipulated to such an nth degree, which you would do with an AI partner as well, wouldn't you? You'd say, right, I want someone who's like this, like this, like this, like this, and then...
Or actually you'd say, I want this character from this TV show, except they love me. Right, basically that's how that goes.
Is that how that works? Oh,
so
great,
did you see the thing that went around social media a while ago where people were really making fun of this guy who said, we've been experimenting with offline podcasts where we meet up, but we don't record. We just have the conversation.
Sounds like us.
There was all this snark about it, about, like, tech bro discovers conversation or something. But I actually think, like, that's a
we
little
should try that for some time, that format. Yeah.
I feel like we have.
Yeah, sometimes
Or
we
you're
do
being
that.
sarcastic.
It's true, when nobody's listening, so this is the
When our
offline
thoughts are
version.
not broadcastable, then that's what that is. But yeah, I actually think that's a bit of light breaking through, right, in that person's life. And I think it should be celebrated, right? It's like, actually, that human contact is just great, and people notice that and seek it out, despite all the pressures pushing us away from it.
Yeah, and I think we found that, haven't we, with people that we've sat down from church and talked with.
Yeah.
That we have conversations with them that we've not had, because it gives a forum. And
It's true, yeah.
Even
So
online podcasts.
Different question. I don't know if it's too late for this, but what does AI do to the idea of omniscience? So we have all these sort of theological projections into God, right? God knows everything. And this is what I find so interesting about it. Like, I'm waiting for a God app to appear where an AI just kind of gives you answers that seem plausible from all the stuff that it seems to know. I mean, I tried with Claude. I said, like, answer only with Bible verses. And it was a very, very liberal version of Claude. I just thought, like, I was like, okay, but isn't, you can throw Leviticus verses at it, and then it came back to some Jesus-loving stuff and so on. Like, it was also, like, very sort of middle of the road of what it was going to do. So there was no way of getting it to be like a firebrand sort of Bible
Claude has been
thumper.
very, very carefully trained to be
Yeah,
that
exactly.
middle of the road liberal by all of those low-paid workers.
But it is interesting to think, like, okay, here's a machine that allegedly knows a lot of what's going on, has access to, well, judgments, quote unquote, because of the probability weights that it has. Does that change what we actually think omniscience means? Does it?
But
Do you think it will influence how people think about God?
It doesn't have insights. If it had all that knowledge and it was using it the way a human who had all that knowledge was using it would, that would be a different question. But it uses it to just make another word come out. And it's not the same thing. And you can tell it's not the same thing. You've described the ways in which it's not the same thing.
I know that it's not the same thing as somebody thinking about it, but like the idea of omniscience is actually that having all the knowledge will make a particular kind of result fall out the other end. So if you can anticipate everything in the world, then you can know what will come out. And we're discovering with these probability machines is not quite what's happening. So I guess I'm just wondering, like...
But that suggests that the world is a probabilistic model as well, and it's not either, is it?
But what does this mean? Again, when we think about God as being omniscient, what do we think he's doing or they are doing?
Well, I don't think he's there going, well, since I know everything, I can predict that according to probability, this is what's going to happen next.
This is all really interesting to me, because when you say omniscience, I think, oh no, God can see what I'm doing. Not God knows all the wisdom. So I'm thinking differently about it.
Okay.
That's the Andy paranoia coming.
That's the Andy paranoia. Yeah, the AI hasn't quite gone there yet.
So you think so you're thinking of omniscience as being the cause of wisdom. Basically,
no, I'm saying there's a projection into God that says because he has all the information that none of us do, he's so much wiser than all of us, and therefore whatever he decides needs to happen next is right.
So I think God's wisdom is separate from God's knowledge.
Okay, how?
Well, I think because the arrow is in the other direction. Maybe this is evangelical Andy coming out, but like God as the author of creation and the thing that drives the engine, even, or something like that. Knowing everything is just a consequence of kind of being everything, or something like that.
So containing everything, but how is that not also, in some ways, what a weight a neural set of neural network weights is? It contains a sort of an image of everything.
Oh, but that's not the same thing as driving
containing
the actual thing, right? Just
driving the actual thing.
A reflection, like a mirror, doesn't make the person looking in the mirror.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Or does it? I don't know.
No, I'm just interested in what we're seeing now. I mean, clearly this is something that you couldn't have done 5 years ago, right? I mean, I still find these technologies extremely fascinating. As a 16-year-old, I would have probably not killed, but there's often, I pinch myself nowadays, think I mean, you and Andy, we would have done the same things as, I don't know, pubescent boys hacking our MS-DOS and trying the first Linux kernels. And, all the work you had to put in a computer and then dreaming of what it would be like to have some sort of, artificial intelligence and what that might even look like and how we do it. And now we have these things at our disposal on little tiny screens that we carry around with us, right? And we're more anxious than we've ever been, whatever. But we have a technology at our disposal we never had before. And how will that change what we think about these sort of omni-verbs is, I guess, what I'm getting at.
You found another way to make me angry, because I casually mentioned earlier that these machines have sucked up all of human written knowledge.
And code, yeah.
And when I was 16 and I was imagining what a machine would be like if it could suck up all of human knowledge, it would have been a lot more useful than these machines are.
I feel like I need to go and read that book that's sitting by the side of my bed and has sat there for an awful long time. That Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, I think she's called. You come across that one? Because essentially that's the argument that she's making, is that capitalism needed a new space to inhabit. So it kind of needed phones, it needed social media, it needed the internet, so that there could be a whole new area for it to colonize.
To colonize the internet.
That's the kind of argument you're making. This is just yet another space of human interaction that it's now kind of having to make money from.
Yeah, but I've completely distracted us from Jörg's question.
No, I just wanted to test. It was a test balloon. I always wonder how technology actually changes the way we think about God. I mean, we've talked about how, the sort of 19th century individualism, Victorian ethics, which were very much akin to the urbanization capitalism, then changed our image of God and what we think being saved means. And so I think a lot of this is going to,
And I think we haven't yet come up with a compelling story for this generation. I listen to my kids as we come away from church, and I'm still just about getting them to go, and they kind of come away, and they're not finding things that engage them. I just think we haven't yet figured out what that story is. We're still telling the story that, oh, it's great, Jesus loves you. And that was for a generation that were never told that they were loved. That was for a generation that never heard those words from their slightly starchy parents. But obviously not all kids, but a lot of kids nowadays from all sorts of backgrounds are very frequently told that they're loved and they're cared for. Whether that's actually followed through in meaningful action is a different thing. So to take kids to church and expect them to be gripped and held by this kind of amazing idea that somebody's telling them God loves them when they see that the world's falling apart around them and that Christians don't seem to be loving the world very much, and some of them even seem to be calling themselves Christians and actively destroying the place and destroying one another, then how is that a compelling story? So what's the what, as you say, how do we view God in an AI age? How do we because Christianity's done an amazing job of constantly not reinventing itself but finding a relevance, and I don't currently see what that relevance is.
Yeah. So what's coming to mind is like if your life is linked in, right, and it's just this splurge of trying to look good by splurging out useless blurb, and then you go like hiking for the weekend and you stand on top of a mountain and you have a moment. It feels like that's the thing missing, right? If the Jesus loving you was the thing that someone else was missing before, maybe the thing that's missing is that moment of connection or something.
As long as you're standing there enjoying the transcendence of the moment and not setting up your tripod on a nearby rock so you can take a selfie.
I'm thinking what slogan you
what's
can put
the best
underneath
angle and
about
what's the
how
best
transcendent
slogan?
this moment was.
Or texting it to somebody and like hoping for their response, and because you
we're
can't
back
be
to
alone.
your sermon from Claude, Jörg.
I have found that quite a helpful structure for this conversation.
Yeah, there is something about Christianity is IRL, as they say.
Yeah, the IRL, and also actually going back to Claude's point, which I'm sure actually was Jörg's point.
No, I didn't feed it anything. In that case, I'm innocent.
Can Christianity also be about bringing clarity, like honest interactions, and not always with an eye to how this looks, but just with an eye to helping the person in front of you understand what's going on, or, so whatever. Like, so I'm thinking about misinformation and disinformation, right? And that the glare is partly people just being prepared to lie in order to advance their cause. And can Christianity also be about just being not prepared to add to that confusion and to be straightforward?
And is there room for darkness rather than light in all of this? Because, as we were saying, like, if stepping out of the glare is actually letting the unknown happen, being on a mountain without a tripod, embracing God as a non-idolatrous God, as a terrifying, future where you don't know what's coming and it's not manipulatable. That's more akin to really embracing sort of darkness, saying, I don't know, I don't have the answer. I mean, I dream of churches actually having the guts to say that.
Like, I don't have the words either to make it sound packageable.
I don't have the words. I know there's many of us struggling with this question. That's why we're here. And we just want to hold each other as we're struggling with this particular question, or as we're like this kind of honesty of, how do you, in a world that promises you that you can be everything with the right tools, that constantly feeds you the things that you might like, that now gives you this kind of mirror that tells everything you say is brilliant, and it's affirmed by the collective knowledge of humanity, is the role of church maybe to say, there is so much you don't know, you're dust. We need to remember that we're dust, and how short and fleeting our life is, and then say, okay, what now matters as we step away from that?
I'm now imagining a Jörg sermon which ends at about the 3/4 point, where we're all on tenterhooks because he's broken everything down, and then he just ends it with, I don't know
either.
and then just walks off the stage. And nice. I bet you couldn't get Claude to write that sermon.
Maybe not.
I'm imagining church without sermons.
Oh, well.
I'm imagining church that actually finds a way to encourage real conversation within its service, as opposed to that cringy turn around to your neighbour and talk about something. because the sermon's suddenly massively cheapened.
Wow. Sermonless church. I mean, if you put that on a poster out there front, you'd probably attract a few people.
Maybe we're rediscovering the mystics and the whole, sitting in silence and thinking about one very short phrase, or I don't know. Maybe we're discovering what a service looks like together as a congregation, rather than coming and finding somebody's gone to AI and said, set me up a service that I've got to deliver today about XYZ.
I have to preach in 2 weeks, guys. I don't know. What am I going to do with that?
Just go do it. Just rebel.
See if you can ask Claude what to say.
Yeah.
Get a challenge Claude to write you an unsermon.
All right. Well, that was almost like a note of hope, I think. So we should probably end it there. So thank you very much, Leah. Thank you very much, Jörg. And thank you for putting up with us for so long, listener. And we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
They told you, and now you do what they told you.